What a great ground. Okay. So good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to have you all here to start our event, People's Movements with Lula Power. Lula in Power, Challenges and Opportunities, a conversation between Brazil and US activists. So I would like to welcome all of you that came tonight, and especially to everyone that braved the weather, right, to be here today. So I will start. My name is Miriam Marx. I belong to Defend Democracy in Brazil committee that organized this with our partners of UNEafro Brasil, the Answer Coalition, all members of Defend Democracy in Brazil that are here, I salute you, and also Movement for Black Lives, Quilomba Collective, USNDB, and Afro-Brazilian Rights Working Group. To start, today we want to give a special thank you to the People's Forum that we call our house for 4 years, right? The People's Forum is completing 4 years supporting social movements for social justice in New York City. And we are proud to be one of the first movements to be incubated here. And during these years, we brought here so many leaders of Brazil, social movements, politicians, to talk in this house, and we are very proud of that. Thank you, the People's Forum, always for the support. Special thanks to staff, especially Claudia de la Cruz, Emanolo de los Santos, the directors of the People's Forum, David Chung. Yeah, David, thank you very much. Right? Yue Pan, the graphic director here that made our beautiful cards. Ryan and everyone here connecting us to you today. So tonight we have very special guests here, and I will invite my friend, my Conrad Fernando of Defend Democracy in Brazil and DSA New York and International DSA, to start the presentation of our speakers tonight. So the dynamic will be, you see we have a lot of people. We have one person via Zoom, as you saw in the program, right? So also, just a minute, I want to welcome all movements that are present. I saw many faces here that we know, people that are interested in Brazil, our comrades from all over New York City. Thank you for coming. So Fernando will present our speakers, and we will start this discussion. Okay? Let's go, Fernando.
Good evening, everyone. It's great to be here. It's great to be here with all of you. First of all, welcome. I would like to thank the People's Forum and all the partners here present tonight. Very exciting to be talking to amazing organizers here. And I will introduce the bios of our speakers tonight. And as I do it, we're going to hear from them. And very exciting. So to start, we'll start with our very own Miriam Marx. Miriam is a political leader of the Brazilian social movement in the United States, a feminist, a human rights defender, residing abroad since 2000. With a long history as an activist, Miriam Marx is one of the leaders of the collective DDB New York, Defend Democracy in Brazil Committee, founded in 2016. Which has been in the active in the United States in the defense of democracy, social justice, resisting fascists in Brazil. DDB New York carry out memorable campaigns such as protest against Sergio Moro in New York City and cancel Bolsonaro, which prevented Bolsonaro from going to New York in 2019. The organization mobilized the Brazilian community and organized solidarity campaigns with social movements in Brazil, mainly for the indigenous people, anti-racism, women's movements, and of political participation with the working class. In recent years, she served as a leader in President Lula's electoral campaign, coordinating the Vota Brasil movement for electoral registration and numerous political campaigns activities, being one of the founders of the New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania Committee. She also has experience in media advocacy, is one of the hosts of the weekly radio program and podcast Estação Mulher, aimed at the immigration community on Radio Brazilian Times and Brazilian Women's Group in Boston. So, Miriam Marques.
Thank you. Eu mesma. So I would like to start this night. I not will talk a lot about how happy we are to be here in this same room, Michael Ratner room, the great Michael Ratner room, right? To talk and we are now in power. How many times we are in this same space, talking about how we would free Lula, how we would destroy our enemies, how we will cancel Bolsonaro. So Defend Democracy in Brazil, my collect, we are housing here in the People's Forum, right? And for 4 years, we had our meeting here every single week to discuss the strategies, what to do, how we'll mobilize, how we'll do media advocacy, and so on. And last year, as you know, was a year of the political campaign of Lula. And we, with our experience, with our, desire and power to mobilize people, we lead a very important campaign for Lula in the United States that although we were not successful in some regions, but we cannot complain, at least in New York City region, the vote here in New York that is for New Jersey, New York, and Pennsylvania, right? Although, and I will have to tell you, talking about challenges already, that one of our big challenges is the extreme right growing among our, communities, especially in Boston, Florida, right, and also here in our region around New Jersey. So it's a big challenge, and we went to the communities to do the Lula campaign, and we almost won here, right? Was a lot of work. And so for me, it's amazing to be here and to know that we are now in power. It's not amazing? I mean, with all the challenges we have, right? Who here we live and we met people from all Latin America in their struggles. So, and every time we have a victory, we celebrate, right? But we celebrate with, the Honduran people, we celebrate with the Peruvians and the Chileans, and now came in Brazil, time to celebrate with Lula, right? So as someone who I have to, in my program, every Saturday, I talk to the community in the Estação Mulher, like women's station program. It's a feminist program for the community. We have to analyze the news of the week, right? And so I'm someone that follow very close social movements in Brazil. And I'm particularly interested in the women's movement. So we had a lot to celebrate with Lula. As you know, Lula was amazing, able to put together the only strategy that shows that we could beat Bolsonaro. And even though people would talk about this, was very hard, right? So I see many challenges, although we are in power, and we have an amazing, amazing situation of have our leaders, even leaders that we brought here, like Aniele Franco as a minister in Brazil, right? We have for the first ever time the indigenous ministry in the hands of one of the biggest leaders ever in history in Brazil, Sônia Guajajara. And with her, she brought many indigenous leaders to lead, right, the work, and the interest of the indigenous people in Brazil. We have environmentalists in the environmental minister. So we have a lot of great people, but we still have a lot of challenges. And one challenge that I want to punctuate, because we have a lot of debate tonight, is for the women's movements, right? Although we do have a minister of a woman in Brazil now, which is great, which we'll celebrate, and we believe that now women will be taken care of how we deserve, how we need, and how movements want, right? It was a big achievement because Bolsonaro was particularly focused in the oppression of women. He had a minister of women that is a woman that's connected to the extreme right and the pro-life movement internationally, right? So, but still for women, for our reproductive rights, we have a long way to go. Just this part that I want to punctuate, because even with a government that has, there has a lot of people in the left, for the women's, we still have a lot to go, especially for black women, poor women in Brazil. But we celebrate that anyway, right? So I will punctuate these issues because Fernando, my friend, will talk about the challenge that we as immigrants communities also have, the opportunities, the success, the happiness, and also the challenges, right, Fernando? Okay, so I will call Fernando now, right, to continue this conversation. Fernando, give me the bio. Okay, Fernando can introduce, I can introduce Fernando. Fernando, Fernando Silva also, right, Fernando? Fernando is a Brazilian young guy that works here in the construction work as a safety manager, right? And Fernando is an activist that we have the honor to have among us in Defend Democracy in Brazil, also in our committee for Lula's campaign of New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania. But Fernando is an activist for DSA, Democrat Socialist of America, and now he's in the youth committee for the international committee, right? So it's an honor to have an activist like Fernando, a young Brazilian, a black Brazilian among us. Thank you, Fernando.
Hi, everyone. So, yeah, on my way here, I was, thinking about how great this is going to be, like listening to a lot of amazing people here together with all of you. And one of the things that I was thinking about, I was even talking briefly before the panel, was 2016, how difficult 2016 was. The democracy in Brazil was at assault. Dilma was in the brink of being impeached. She ended up being impeached. And then 2 months later, we had Trump winning the election in the United States. And to me, that was terrifying. As an immigrant from Brazil, I'm a DACA recipient from a mixed status family, so I was terrified about that. I joined right after Trump won the election. The stuff was, Brazil, Dilma was impeached. I felt that it was time for me to do something. I joined the immigrant rights movement. 2 years later, I joined DSA. And the reason was I noticed that the immigrant rights is the same as workers' rights. And I don't see another way for us to achieve workers' emancipation if not through socialism. So I joined DSA, been doing work there. And when I joined DSA, it was funny because I noticed I wasn't alone. Everybody was getting involved somehow. DSA went from 5,000 members when Trump was elected to 90,000 members into 2021 in our last national convention. So I saw that I was not alone. a lot of other organizations that we do work together, like PSL. My chapter in North Jersey, DSA, did a lot of immigrant rights work with PSL, Movimento Cosecha, and others in New Jersey. So everywhere I was going, I saw that solidarity was brewing. People were excited to get involved because we were going through some dire times. So everybody hit the ground running, right? A lot of organizing going on. My chapter was part of the coalition that we successfully pressure local governments to close 3 out of the 4 for-profit jails in New Jersey that incarcerates immigrants from New Jersey, New York, Connecticut. So that was a big achievement. My comrades from my chapter, they did a lot of good work with that. I joined DDB, the Defend Democracy in Brazil, for the Free Lula campaign. After that, we started with the Lula presidential campaign, and same thing. We went to places, talked to people. Miriam and Natalia, their leadership was amazing. As we get to places, we saw that even though the majority of a lot of places we went, there was a heavy Bolsonaro support. We were not alone. People were waving at us, doing the L for Lula. So we saw that people were out there. I say that we got very close to flip the vote for Lula here in New York, and I think the DDP was a big part of it. And got us here. We got Lula was elected. Most of us were here celebrating. Some people were crying. I was one of the ones crying downstairs celebrating because the Lula was back. The Workers' Party was in power, and that was very was a working class victory. But as grassroots organizers, at least me, I understand that electoral politics is not enough for us to achieve the emancipation that we want. Grassroots organizing is it's the most basic level of organizing. It's the most important one. So being here, listening to what other comrades here went through on their organizing, I think it's empowering. And even though Trump is no longer in the presidency, we have Lula in the government in Brazil. That means we cannot stop. We have a lot more work to do, especially here for personally for the immigrant community. So yeah, it's exciting to be here. I think that we're gonna be expanding a lot of these topics. So moving forward, I
want to tell people that we have some chairs here in the front, okay? And also, I welcome everybody in the media that are present. Journalist Eloisa is there. Eloisa, thank you for being here. Okay, Fernando, let's go.
So tonight, I'm going to introduce a very special guest. We have here with us Douglas Belchior. Douglas is a history teacher, graduated in PUC São Paulo, co-founder of the Movement for Popular Education and for Fighting Against Racism, UNEafro Brasil, co-founder of the Brazilian Black Coalition for Rights, coordinator of the national campaign, There Are Hungry People, Tem Gente Com Fome. In 2022, Douglas ran for federal Congress seat through the state of São Paulo and received more than 50,000 votes through the Workers' Party. So, Douglas Belchior. Douglas will be speaking in Portuguese, and we have a translator.
Quanto tempo eu tenho? 5 minutos. Ok. Ok. Muito. Eu fiz uma colinha. E o meu amigo. Ele vai fazer. Joia ele.
Sure.
Muito boa noite a todas e todos.
Good evening, everybody.
Eu quero agradecer muito a presença de cada um de vocês que estão aqui, que saíram das suas casas, que vieram dos seus trabalhos, para conversar com a gente essa noite.
I want to thank you all for coming here, coming from work and from your home, to be here with us.
Eu quero agradecer muito Miriam, Natália, toda o time, né, do Democracy Brasil, agradecer a casa do People's Forum, agradecer muito o Quilomba Coletivo, com a Tassiana, que está nos acompanhando aí online. Tudo bem, Tassiana? Agradecer muito também o Teófilo, a Janvieve, o Cleaver, os meus colegas que estão aqui comigo, a Tenjui, Eugênio, a Miriam, o Abner, meu companheiro, que está me acompanhando nessa tarefa de tradução. Desde Texas, passando por DC, o Fernando também. Então, muito obrigado a vocês.
I want to thank the Defend Democracy in Brazil Committee and the People's Forum for this event and for organizing this event, and the group Quilomba. We have Tassiana from this group online with us. And I want to thank Teófilo and Tenjue and Miriam Marquez and Abner, who stems from Texas, then DC, and now is in New York, and he's helping with translating.
Eu sou muito honrado com a presença de vocês. Eu ajudo a organizar um movimento de educação antirracista no estado de São Paulo, a UNEafro Brasil.
I'm honored to be here and speaking for UNEafro, the educational movement in Brazil for promoting black people.
É um movimento de base. A gente reúne professores voluntários que em periferias e favelas oferecem um trabalho de reforço escolar, preparação para o acesso de jovens negros à universidade, ao trabalho, e dessa maneira combatemos o racismo através do acesso à educação.
We, as a group that organizes educational activities, we have been preparing the work forces and I lost most of it. Next.
E também sou consultor junto ao Instituto de Referência Negra Peregum, um material que eu deixei para alguns de vocês e que eu gostaria que todo mundo pegasse antes de ir embora. Eu tenho mais na bolsa, daqui a pouquinho a gente entrega. Vou falar do Brasil agora.
And also, I belong to this group that has been distributing this brochure that I would like everybody to have one.
Ok. Vou falar do Brasil agora.
I'm going to talk about Brazil now.
Lula venceu as eleições.
Lula won the elections.
E nós temos no Brasil um governo de pacto e de transição.
And we have in Brazil a government of pact and transition.
É um governo fruto de uma aliança que vai da esquerda histórica até a direita considerada democrática, se é que existe direita e democrática.
It is along a wide spectrum that goes from the left to the illuminated right, if there is such a thing.
Mas vamos considerar assim porque a história nos impõe essa necessidade.
But it is history that imposes us this situation, and we have to face it.
Afinal de contas, nós tivemos o governo de um proto-fascista, o Bolsonaro.
After all, we had a government of a proto-fascist, Bolsonaro.
E essa história, ela tem um momento importante e catalisador no momento em que a Dilma foi deposta injustamente do comando do país.
And one thing that happened that was determinant of this situation was the moment when Dilma Rousseff, the president elect for the second time, was destituted of power in a scam impeachment.
É curioso e intrigante, sobretudo para quem gosta de história e ciências sociais, que quem derrubou a Dilma é a tal direita democrática que hoje está na Aliança do Pacto.
And it is curious to notice that people that promoted that coup are the ones that are now promoting the democratic right that is.
Mas a história é assim, ela nos impõe uma realidade e nós temos que lidar com ela.
But history is such that we have to face the reality as it comes to us.
O Bolsonaro aprofundou todas as desgraças que o Estado brasileiro e as elites brasileiras sempre impuseram ao povo brasileiro.
Bolsonaro has imposed upon Brazilians the worst of the right-wing prejudices.
Ele piorou as polícias, tornou as polícias mais violentas.
He turned the police more violent.
Engajou as polícias na luta política e ideológica que separou o país.
And he enrolled the police in the right-wing movement that dominated the country.
Estimulou o crescimento de grupos nazistas e de extrema direita em todo o país.
And it stimulated the growth of Nazi or fascistic groups all over Brazil.
Destruiu todas as políticas públicas que tinham a ver com direitos sociais e econômicos dos mais pobres.
Destroyed all the politics of in defense of minorities all over Brazil.
Destruiu dentro do Estado brasileiro todos os espaços que nós construímos como espaço de defesa de direitos.
And all the spaces that we had built up within the Brazilian government were completely destroyed.
E a vida do povo brasileiro, que nunca foi fácil com qualquer governo, nos últimos 4 anos piorou.
And the life of the Brazilians that was never as good as people deserved really got much worse.
E quando a gente fala sobre a vida do povo brasileiro, é importante lembrar que a população negra significa 56% dessa população.
And we must take into account that the Brazilian population is black over 50%. People in Brazil are considering themselves blacks.
A maioria esmagadora das pessoas que precisam do Estado e das políticas sociais são pessoas negras.
Need these social politics are exactly the black people.
Que precisam de serviços como saúde, educação, moradia, saneamento básico.
Services such as health, place to live, and education.
De maneira que no Brasil, e é importante dizer isso,
in Brazil, it is important to
negros são a maioria.
Blacks are the majority.
Não é um debate sobre direitos de minorias.
It's not a debate on questions of
é um debate
who's the minority.
Sobre a existência de uma maioria populacional.
It's the question of a majority of the population.
E todas as crises nesse país, elas se justificam porque o povo que sofre com ela é o povo negro.
And all those policies are justified because who is suffering the brunt of it are black people.
É impossível um governo injusto, como o do Bolsonaro, não ser profundamente racista, porque são os negros que sofrem com a violência do Estado e a negação de direitos.
And it is black people who suffer with the lack of support from the government, which is what happened throughout the 4 years of Bolsonaro.
De maneira que esse governo comemorado e que nos deixa respirando um ar de otimismo, que é o caso do governo Lula, ele só pode ser justo se ele for um governo para os negros.
So now we enjoy the new government led by Lula, and And this is the government that will defend the rights of black people.
Num país de maioria negra não é possível justiça social sem justiça racial.
Justice in a country like Brazil, where most people are black, without social justice.
Se não for um governo para barrar a violência da polícia,
If it is not a government to stop the violence done by the police,
a violência da polícia contra negros,
and the violence of the police against black people,
no Brasil, um jovem negro de até 29 anos é assassinado a cada 23 minutos.
in Brazil, one young black Brazilian is murdered every 22 minutes.
O Brasil teve um aumento exponencial de violência contra mulheres, especialmente mulheres negras, nos últimos 4 anos.
Growth of the violence against women in the last 4 years.
O Brasil é o país que mais mata pessoas LGBTQIA+ no mundo.
Brazil is the country that kills more LGBTQA+ in the world.
O Brasil é o país, talvez, onde as mudanças climáticas mais atingem a população negra em todo o planeta.
Brazil is the country where the climatic changes have hit most hard the black people.
Esse final de semana,
this weekend, last weekend,
no litoral norte de São Paulo,
in the northern coast of São Paulo,
até agora, cerca de 60 pessoas estão confirmadas mortas.
Up to now, 56 people have died. Confirmed.
Em decorrência de desabamentos de morros, de casas.
As a consequence of the landsliding in the hills.
Nas grandes metrópoles, muita enchente.
And in the big cities, a lot of flooding.
E a casa que é soterrada pelo morro quando desce.
And the housing that is destroyed by the mudslide.
E as casas que são tomadas pela água da enchente são sempre de famílias negras.
And the houses that are hit by inundations are always black people.
E não há políticas de mitigação, de socorro e para impedir esse tipo de situação que se repete a cada ano.
And there is no providence taken to mitigate or to prevent these things from happening.
Daí que esse governo só tem sucesso em produzir justiça se enfrentar o racismo.
So the new government will only be successful if it is willing to confront racism.
E eu acredito no compromisso de Lula com isso.
And I believe in the commitment that Lula has toward black people.
Mas mais do que nunca é preciso um movimento social forte.
But more than ever, what is important is a strong grassroots movement.
Para cobrar o governo,
to keep the government accountable,
para apontar o caminho,
to indicate the way,
e para sustentar o governo no poder, porque nós não podemos confiar na direita brasileira.
And to sustain the government in power because we cannot trust Brazilian society.
Ativistas do movimento negro ocuparam vários espaços estratégicos dentro do governo. Isso é muito bom.
In the new government, several places of importance have been given to black people, and this is very important.
Desde ministros de Estado até postos técnicos muito importantes.
From ministers of state to technical positions, there are black people.
Mas é preciso que haja pressão para que tenha políticas.
But we need to put pressure so that there are policies
que atendam o povo negro.
That could respond to black people's needs.
Para a gente sair da dimensão do discurso da representatividade.
So that we can get away with this discourse of representativity.
Queremos negros no governo, sim.
We want black people in the government.
Mas precisamos mais ainda de políticas para a população negra.
But even more, we need policies including black people.
E eu termino falando sobre o risco de um futuro que é logo ali na esquina.
And there is a risk of the future that is just around the corner.
O pensamento da extrema direita está vivo como nunca no Brasil.
The way of thinking of the right-wing people is livelier than ever in Brazil.
Não podemos repetir erros do passado.
We cannot repeat errors of the
Quando
past.
tivemos governos de esquerda
When we had governments of the left
que, por conta da sua dinâmica, de buscar lideranças nos movimentos para compor os governos,
because of they're looking for leaderships that could be part of the government,
de cooptar movimentos em certa medida,
to co-opt the movement to a certain
diminuir a força do movimento social,
it diminished the strength of the social
porque a disputa não pode ficar restrita ao processo eleitoral.
because the dispute cannot be centered only on electoral years.
A disputa política que se deu na eleição, ela continua no dia a dia, no cotidiano.
The political dispute that came up during the elections, it needs to be continued throughout the whole year.
E essa é uma realidade mundial.
And this is a worldwide reality.
Temos muito parecido com o que acontece nos Estados Unidos, assim
It's
como
very
diversos
similar to what
países,
happened in the United States and in other countries,
onde a extrema-direita usa a mesma receita.
where the extreme right uses the same recipe.
Aliás, Bolsonaro está a viajar os Estados Unidos
Bolsonaro is actually traveling throughout the
para
United
dialogar com a
States
extrema-direita americana
to talk to the extreme
e
right
também do Canadá,
in the United States and in Canada,
e continua dando suporte para lideranças políticas de extrema-direita no Brasil.
and continues to bring support to extreme right-wing in Brazil.
Mais da metade da população brasileira é governada por governadores de estado bolsonaristas.
Most of the states in the Federation of Brazil are governed by Bolsonaro followers.
Os principais estados brasileiros, como São Paulo, Rio de Janeiro,
Important
Minas Gerais,
states like São Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, Minas Gerais,
são os estados com a maior população votante, inclusive.
it's the states that have the most of the electorate.
E daqui a 1 ano e meio tem eleições locais, municipais.
And within 2 years, we will have municipal elections, local government elections.
E nós corremos o risco de eleger, mais uma vez, uma maioria de extrema-direita nos territórios, nas bases em todo o país.
And we're running the risk of having local governments of extremist, right-wing extremists all over Brazil.
Daí que essa nossa viagem
So this trip that we are taking
pelos Estados Unidos agora,
in the United States right now,
passando pelo Texas, por Washington e agora aqui em Nova York,
we went to Texas, then Washington, and now we are here in New York.
tem a função de reconectar com os movimentos de base aqui,
We want to connect to governments, to groups,
com os movimentos de resistência em toda a América,
and movements of resistance in all over America,
para que a gente possa resistir junto
so that we can resist together
ao mal comum que nos afeta.
to the common evil that affects us.
O nazismo, o racismo, a homofobia,
Nazism,
o patriarcado,
fascism,
o machismo,
Patriarchy,
o capitalismo
Nazism.
racial que nos dirige.
the racial capitalism that
E nós precisamos
governs us.
ficar alinhados, hermanados para resistir e
And we
vencer
need to be
em
organized
nome dos nossos
and
povos em todo o mundo. Muito obrigado.
together with all the people in the world. Thank you.
Now, I would like to introduce to all of you Tendui McHarris. Tendui was born in the Bronx. Is an organizer and a dedicated movement builder. For almost 20 years, she has worked on or led a range of issues from police violence, the death penalty, and maternity mortality. For more than 8 years, Tendiui's primary focus was building black movements infrastructures and working with movements partners and career organizations to amplify our collective power. She has been a critical leader and helped build the movement for Black Lives. In 2019, she began work with partners to build the Green New Deal Network, a coalition focused on aligning forces to advance a climate care, jobs, and justice agenda. Tenjiwi has also served as a leader of the Rising Majority, a coalition focused on developing greater alignment among organizations working in different arenas of struggle in response to the urgency of this political moment and the assaults of the well-being of our people. Tenjiwi self-identifies as a Pan-African, Black internationalist, and feminist. Tenjiwi.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Can you hear me okay? It's always hard going after my comrade Douglas. Very honored and grateful. Also, I have a bit of a headache, so if I ever need to pause and take a second to collect my thoughts, forgive me for that. I just want to say I'm very honored and humbled to just even be here, to be with comrades that are organizing in Brazil, and also to be in the presence of you all. I really believe that we're living in a pretty profound moment in time, which has significant challenges and threats, but it's also a moment of great possibility. It's a moment that's really calling on us to build power. And I really do believe, like, the only way through is our solidarity. The only way through is really learning from each other and really understanding that our power comes from moving towards greater unity. So really humbled to be here. And I tried to think about where to start. It's always hard to figure out where to start in terms of like how to understand this moment. And we talk often about the threat, the rise of the far right, fascism, the rise of authoritarianism. But I think this moment also calls us to really understand, like, how did we arrive at this moment? And there's so many things, but one is the convergence of multiple crises. We are dealing with an ecological crisis, we're dealing with the crisis of empire, and we're dealing with the crisis of capitalism. And really, capitalism continues to produce crisis after crisis. And when I say ecological crisis, we talk about changing global temperatures. We talk about the ways in which so many people are impacted based on rising global temperatures and climate change, and that particular crisis, as well as the crisis of empire, which is essentially speaks to the fact that those in positions of power have failed to meet the material conditions of people, and people legitimately around the world and in the US are questioning those in governing power. And again, all of this is deeply connected to racial capitalism and the crisis and the fact that capitalism causes crisis after crisis. And at the end of the day, we've been living under decades of neoliberal economic policy that essentially put infinite economic growth at the expense of human survival. And it has pushed us into a moment where we are seeing the rise of the far right authoritarianism and also fascism. But it's important to say that fascist ideas have always existed within the United States. White supremacy, ethno-nationalism, Christian nationalism have always existed within the United States. And in fact, if you look at various different policies in terms of in various parts of the country, you can see like policies that have an authoritarian nature. What we're watching, though, is an escalation in terms of the rise of the far right. And what do we mean by what that rise looks like? One is they are building a social movement. The biggest threat, I think, about the rise of the far right is essentially them looking to build a movement a mass movement of people that has a multiracial, multi-class character. They are trying to absorb our people in mass and in scale in ways in which we have had a challenge on the left to absorb at that level of scale. So that's one in terms of the rise. But what we often talk about in terms of the rise of the far right and authoritarianism is them both obtaining and consolidating governing power, which they've done successfully in multiple different ways and has been part of a multi-decade agenda, as well as what some refer to as the culture wars. But essentially, it's a way in which to take a hold over the war over ideas, which is deeply connected to building a social movement. And so we're living in a time where it's important to not just say, what is happening now? We're seeing political violence. We're seeing that they're gaining electoral victories, and we're seeing them building mass movement. But what we really need to think about is what's going to happen in the next several years and next several decades to come. We have to really think seriously about the urgency of the moment we're living in, and the fact that while there are differences amongst the far right, we can't treat them as what's the word, as the same thing. Sorry, can't treat this as the same thing. There are differences, but they've created a coalitional bloc that's very clear about moving towards an authoritarian agenda. So we have to not think about what is the threat now, but what we have to forecast out in the next several years or decades and take that with a high level of urgency and seriously, while also understand that what led us here is neoliberalism and the fact that we have seen the failures of the democratic establishment. And so we're really dealing with the dual threat of neoliberalism and the rise of the far right. And so that's sort of the moment that we're in. And when I think about what's required of social movements in this moment and some of our challenges, one is we need, a close comrade of mine talks about it, we need ideological coherence. And Maurice Mitchell put out a piece on this. If social movements, we actually have to be very clear. How are we fighting now? But like, what is the vision that we're working towards? Because in the absence of ideological coherence, you are serving a neoliberal agenda. You are essentially serving the dominant political ideology, which is neoliberalism. And so we need an alternative vision and we need to move with a higher level of ideological coherence. The second is that we have to challenge the false dichotomy of responding rapidly in this moment and also advancing a long-term strategy. We are in a moment that requires us to have long-term vision. We have to fight now while also thinking about what is the multi-strategy that we are also working in. The other one is that we have to build united front power. Now is a time where we work with people that we are not used to working with. We have to build the level of alliance that's required in this moment. And then perhaps one of the most important that I think about is that we need to organize people. Like we are in a moment where oftentimes we conflate mass engagement with mass organizing. And that we are in a moment where there's various different ways to organize people to scale, but we actually need to organize people to the scale that's required in this moment. So we have to engage in mass organizing. The last thing I'll just say is that oftentimes we find ourselves in a time that is very challenging, that's very urgent, but nothing is predetermined, right? We can organize with great urgency, but also understand that we can't operate under the cloud of pessimism, skepticism, and defeat. The moment we organize and inform our organizing as if we're losing, we are serving our enemy's agenda. We have to organize in a way in which that we are embodying radical hope, and we are challenging ourselves to love each other, to have the conversations, the debate over ideas that we need to have, so we can move towards greater clarity. And the last piece I'll just say is that I've been very inspired by watching social movements around the world. I really believe the only way through is our solidarity. The truth is, and a comrade said this while I was with them in Puerto Rico, if it's necessary, it must be possible. This moment, and because of how global capitalism is operating, we actually need a mass global movement around the world that can confront the convergence of multiple crises of our time. We have to have our eyes towards building the type of durable, lasting solidarity that is very clear that the only way to beat the threats and challenges of our time is if we do it together.
Up next, we have Abner Sostenos. Abner is a popular educator with over 20 years of experience. He is a PhD candidate in the Latin American history at the Department of History at the University of California, San Diego. His dissertation title is Brazilian Black Imagination in the Films, or How African Americans Shaped Modernity Through Movies. Afro-Brazilians through movies, 1950-1990. He was a visiting researcher at the Center for Latin American and Caribbean Studies at Brown University. He holds a MA in Social History from the Federal University of Rio, and a BA in History also from Federal University of Rio. He's a co-author of History Written, History Lived, Social Movements, Memory, and a Political Repression During the Military Dictatorship in Brazil. Abner.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, everybody. To be honest, it's like almost impossible talk after, what I can actually say after that. But I'm so honored also and humbled to be here today, and also seeing some face that is like so, familiar for me, and others like that I have, in contact today. I'd like to say that meet Teófilo here, it's like incredible, and Fernando too is incredible, because all the time when we, Afro-Brazilian got here US, we don't, normally meet black people here. And because that we are not ever, we are not identified as a Brazilian, because people don't know Afro-Brazilians, because, I suppose why, so it's like, so important seeing you two here, and of course everybody too, right? So I'd like to talk about the necessity, because it's like sometimes when we are in a social movement, we think that everything starts with us, right? You build like, this moment now. We are now try to make some connection, blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. But actually, Brazil, US, and some Afro-Latinos have a history of coalition, have a history of, I can mention thousand moments throughout the history, since at least at the beginning of this, the last century, 20th century, right? So it's like not new, but as we need like new strategies. So how to build this strategy? I think like it is like one, challenge for us to think how to connect, in fact, black people, black folks in diaspora world, especially in these, Americas, Brazil, US, Latin America and Caribbean countries, to build a real, network to face, because you know what? All the time, wherever, if you have sometimes, left-wing government, we see the same history. The level of life increased a lot, but for black people, no. Brazil had like, just an example of that. Brazil had like during Dilma government, a beautiful project called like Science Without Border, Ciência Sem Fronteira, And you know what? 87% of the people that came around the world was white folks. 87%. Despite the fact that Brazilian population, as Douglas mentioned, is like 5-6% of the whole Brazilian population. Because we have a history in US too, and also in the other Latin America country too, this sort of racial democracy. So when do we like put our things, in the place, we are accused as a racist, because we are talking about racism, right? So in this sense, when I think, there is an allegation, because Afro-Brazilian don't come, it's like, professor. I know that everybody here is professor. Some of you are professor too, but I prefer, speaking in this way, right? So, what is the reason that people say that we don't have like Afro-Brazilian here? Because Afro-Brazilian don't have access to English. But do you know what? The same research about Science Without Borders show that even when we have like Afro-Brazilian and white folks, white Brazilian, these scholars prefer white folks, despite the fact that we both don't have English. or English, expertise or, whatever. So when do you think about coalition, this sort of anti-racist movement, right? In US, Latin America, it's beautiful. Of course, it's beautiful. When we are talking about left-wing government in Brazil, it's fantastic. For who? It's my question. Yes? For who? So we have to push. We need to push Lula government. Lula now, it's so, sensitive for racial issues. Lula said, during my times in prison, I read a lot of book about racism. I read this book, that book, that book. Now I understand a little bit racism in Brazil. But the government needs to understand more. We need to celebrate Lula victory. Of course. I had a lot of, friends that passed away during the Bolsonaro government. It was, catastrophic moment in our history, of course. But we need push because we have now a great opportunity to put, in fact, this agenda not only in Brazil, not only with black folks in Brazil, but this sort of coalition throughout Americans. I don't know how to do it because that we are here together to try figure out a way to connect more African American folks with Afro-Brazilian, because it's so difficult to penetrate in African American community here as a black man. It's like I'm living here in US for a couple times, and I know that it's so difficult to penetrate in black, African American community, create a good relationship, without essentialized race. You know what I mean? So I think we have this moment now, a great opportunity for building this network, real network that has been constructed historically since the beginning of the 20th century. We have a lot of, Brazilian activists that had here in US during the 20s, 30s, 60s. Abdias Nascimento, Lélia Gonzalez. I have 1,000 names. It's not new for us. It's so how to do it. It's not only for us, right? In this city here. It's for everybody, even who is watching or will watching this record. How to be in touch effectively to build this relationship is our challenge now. And how to use these sort of windows with Lula government to press, because, here in US, we did a lot of research. We know who participate in this Lula campaign here in US. We have to continue to be mobilized for celebration, but also, of course, for fight. Thank you, guys.
Moving on, we have Tassiana Moura de Oliveira, a black woman from the northeast of Brazil.
Your chair.
Immigrant
The
and
chair
member.
moves, okay?
Immigrant and member of the Quilombo Collective, a collective of black Brazilian women living in the United States and Canada. Lecturer at the Department of Latin American Studies at SUNY Albany. Postdoc researcher at CBRAP. PhD in political science in UFPE, the Federal University of Pernambuco. Her research interests involve Brazilian political studies, especially judicial policy, judicialization of public policies, and the relations between law and society. She is currently working on a project focused on environmental racism and the access to justice for Brazilian quilombos. Tassiane is with us via Zoom.
I hope that you can listen to me well. If you can't, please let me know. It's very difficult to talk after Abine. Hello, Abine. Nice to see you. I wish it was there. Me and Abine are together in project that helps to teach the Black Brazilian people how to apply for American universities, actually international universities, and I think that's a common goal. Well, moving on, I'd like to thank the invitation for the Quilombo Collective to be here and representing the Quilombo Collective and to be substituting my colleague and sister, Juliana Meyer. I don't know if there's another sister there, but if there's someone from Quilombo, just hello. And I'm going to share with you some ideas, some challenges that I see for Black women in the next few years, regardless of where we live, Brazil, US, or Canada. After surviving Trump and Bolsonaro, we had our time to celebrate. Okay, we actually joined our forces during the campaign. Then we celebrated in December, or the end of October, December. We had a wake-up call on January 8th. Now we have to focus on making sure that our needs and are going to be answered through policies, as Douglas remembered. We have to make sure that we don't lose the rights that who came before us fought hard to conquer and move forward, reaching higher places in the social and political ladder. Advancement of conservatism and a decline in global freedom for 16 consecutive years is a reality. It is not, I'm not guessing this number, it is based on the Freedom House 2022 Freedom in the World Assessment. And this advancement of conservatism changed the future that we envisioned back in 2003, when we thought that that was the time to build a new and just Brazil. Don't want to point fingers at anyone, but I believe that social movements need to look at the past and never forget what happened. It is great that we have achieved some important roles inside the federal executive this year, but they are somewhat marginal roles. And Congress is too conservative to let it loose, to let it go with it. The judiciary system do not represent our demands. It is still too white, too male, and too old. There are many consecutive fights that we have to deal with right now, but I focus on in one that is of my main concern, education and science. The reform of the ensino médio or high school in Brazil, for example, is dangerous to say the least. It is important to review it and make sure that we have a strong central federal policy that delineates the curriculum, including, of course, a decolonized perspective of, of our history, history based on the history of the African diaspora in Brazil. In the US, as a professor teaching in the US, I'm really concerned with the future of the humanities studies. Do we have a future? Back to Brazil. I'm happy to see that researchers already got a raise on their stipend. That's great. But we need to ensure investment in science in our universities, my beloved UFTF, and give professors and students the capacity to dedicate their full time to engage in excellent science. For that, we need to review stipends, scholarships, international programs as well. Of course, I'm confident because I know who's there, who's behind this project, that will see the advancement of affirmative action. I know how far we've come since 2003, but we need more. Now we need to make sure that we have more Black and Indigenous professors and high-level researchers. We must decolonize academia. It is not possible for us to move up in the academic hierarchy if the rules of the job market are written by white, old, hetero, cisgender men. While we have these white men sitting in front of the doors, affirmative actions will not fully help. Lastly, there is an important election coming up. The municipal elections tend to be one that representatives of grassroots movements are more engaged and have more chance to remain locally. My opinion is that we need to be more pragmatical. Electoral politics is not enough to achieve our goals. I think Fernando said that, but there is nothing about us without us. And we won't see social justice without racial justice. Yes, Douglas, totally agree with you. So that we need to play the electoral game and get there. We need to be elected so we can change the rules, make policies for us, and make racial justice. So we need to go back to the whiteboard, reorganize the coalition, and secure our seat. Thank you so much.
And last but definitely not least, we have Eugene Perrier. Eugene is a longtime journalist and community organizer currently based in New York City. As a high school student in Charlottesville, Virginia, Eugene organized a walkout when the war in Iraq began in 2003. And helped to organize a number of large-scale demonstrations that took place against the continuing U.S. war and occupation of Iraq and Afghanistan. He was a key leader in the struggle to free the Gina 6 in 2007, was a founder of the anti-gentrification group Justice First, as well as the Jobs Not Jails Coalition, DC Ferguson Movement, and the Stop Police Terror Project in DC. Perrier is the author of the book Shackled and Chained, Mass Incarceration in Capitalist America, and worked for 4 years as the lead host of By Any Means Necessary, a public affairs radio program in Washington, D.C. Currently, he is a host at the Breakthrough News, a social justice media project based in New York City. Eugene.
And I have to tell you that Eugene has a big fan club in the Brazilian activist community.
Well, thank you for that, Miriam, and thank you, Fernando, and thanks to everyone who's here. I feel so honored to be on this panel and to have been invited by DDB, which is always there anytime we need to do anything, standing up against, you know, these beasts that we're fighting. So I'm honored to be here with you. You know, I think that spaces like this are so important now for many reasons. But, you know, as capital is seeking to move us more into online, artificial, virtual reality existences, which make it much easier for them to create these bubbles and these silos in which we exist in close relation, but, you know, essentially not even in the same space. And of course, there's power in the internet. But I do think creating physical spaces of social solidarity is becoming more and more important in the context of the deliberate strategies, I think, to keep us from having the level of community and building the level of community that helps us build our resilience against capitalism and its crimes. You know, I think this is a moment that, as we've all said, it's a moment of both great challenges and great opportunities. which maybe also makes it a moment for us to also develop our dialectical thinking, right? Oppression breeds resistance. It's part of the same whole. Like, you can only really have great opportunities to struggle and win if there are great challenges facing you. And it's interesting to note that the Trump movement, the MAGA movement, whatever we want to call it in America, has identified Brazil as the most important country internationally to build the extreme right. And when I had the privilege of being in Brazil in the first round of the election last year, my comrade Gabby was with me here, she's here, and we were in various different parts of the country. You know, you hear in the media, you know, Trump is working with Bolsonaro and MAGA is tied to Brazil and so on and so forth. But I have to say, I was not prepared for how similar the playbook really is. And how, speaking no Portuguese, like just the feeling, honestly, of the Bolsonaro movement was so similar to what we experienced struggling against the extreme right in America. And I think we probably are at a loss if we look at these two movements as different political projects. I think it's one extreme right political project in the Americas. The people who support Trump support Bolsonaro, they support Bukele in El Salvador. We can go on and on. They're constantly working together. They're constantly meeting, traveling between the countries. And I think, again, another reason why these spaces of social solidarity are important, because obviously the linkages have to be built between us across whatever barriers that exist to build a counterforce. But I think it's an interesting point of why they have identified Brazil, or at least why I think they've identified Brazil, but I'm just always open for discussion. From my point of view, the role of Brazil as a touchstone for the broader, whatever we want to call it, you know, left-wing tide movement, you know, rising resistance in the Americas is absolutely critical as we're moving into this so-called multipolar world. And I think that, you know, for many people suffering under the heel of imperialism, it's very welcome to see US unipolar imperialism starting to lose a little bit of hegemony. But the reality is it's also extremely dangerous. And it has raised the danger of war, even nuclear war, to an even higher level than it's been, you know, maybe since the 1950s, in the height of the first Cold War. And I think what's interesting about what's happening in the Americas, many different gradations, from Brazil to Colombia to Venezuela to Cuba to Ecuador to right here in the United States, you know, where tens of millions of people have taken up very radical ideas in the past few years, is it represents a social pole in the broader world stage. As the world enters great chaos, turmoil, as more and more people are looking and searching for answers, the reality of a people-centered process rooted in mass grassroots movements that are challenging for power, winning power in limited and great extents, it offers a reference point for the peoples of the world to resist neoliberalism, as we've been discussing. And that is critically important for the world, but it's super dangerous for the imperialist. That there's something that in Asia, in Africa, all over, people can look to and say, well, it seems like that looks pretty good. Education for all, healthcare for all, addressing the critical challenges of our time. And I think that, in a way, is why Brazil has become so central to the so-called MAGA movement, to neutralize the motion coming from the grassroots movement and from the working class and the oppressed peoples there, because they know if they can shut down the movement in Brazil, it'll be that much easier to shut down the movements everywhere. And I think we can see that from the impact of the people all across the Western Hemisphere at the election of Lula. You know, we were in the MST, had an after party on the election night in the first round. Obviously, it wasn't as exciting of a party we thought it was going to be. But, you know, there are people there from all across Latin America and all across the Americas, actually all across the world. And it was like we were all from Brazil. You know, I mean, we were all so happy to say this level of elation, even though this is not our country, which I think just speaks to the power of this connection and the ability and the power of our movements and why they're targeting us in certain ways. Just two other quick points I want to highlight. I think when we're talking about sort of the rising tide of resistance in America, I keep saying this, so I'm going to say it on camera now so I can hold myself accountable. I want to work on a journalism project called Afro Alba. Because when you look across the Americas, Brazil, Colombia, Ecuador, Venezuela, Cuba, so many places, certainly also here in the United States. The descendants of slaves, the African diaspora, is the backbone of that resistance. It's often the cultural touchstone of that resistance. Even many non-black peoples look to the Quilombos, the slave revolts, the Black Panther Party, Fannie Lou Hamer, all of these heroes throughout the years and throughout the generations as the touchstone for their broader movements that may or not even be fully, or at least in the general sense, related. And I think to speak very much to the point that I really appreciate, my brothers and comrades mentioning here about left movements and how African descended communities are often marginalized even in those spaces. We have to raise the issue of racism and fighting white supremacy, not just simply as something that is morally right to do, but that is an ideological understanding that obviously the construction of capitalism in the Western Hemisphere has placed Black people in a unbelievably strategic leverage point that our struggle can move every other struggle and always does. And that it's not just a question of being anti-racist and I'm doing this because I want to help Black people, but if you want to transform your life and live a better life, you must put anti-racism in the struggle and the fight against white supremacy right there at the forefront. That ideologically has to become baked into the DNA of our movements if we want to move past the different challenges in the past. The final point I want to make is hearkening back to a point I just made about the rising tide of war in this multipolar reality. Obviously, there's the old saying we have here, you put an animal in the corner, it's the most dangerous place because it's more likely to lash out. US imperialism is not going quietly into the night. And in fact, they're becoming more violent and willing to risk the total destruction of humanity with nuclear brinkmanship to maintain their hold over the world processes. Which means that the issue of peace, I believe, has to be elevated by our movements to a much higher level right now, because quite frankly, we're seeing the opposite of that here in the United States. A total war chorus, whether it's Russia, China, wherever, it's war and sanctions against anybody different. And I think for President Lula coming to Washington, D.C., to me, the most important factor was that he sat in the Oval Office and he said, we want peace, not war. Coming off of him saying, we will not send ammunition to Ukraine. And that is a touchstone that is hard to get here in America. And if you raise it, they say you're just a Putin puppet. And so to have someone like Lula, who is so well respected across wide ranges, become a reference point of the fight for peace, I think is a very important element of what Lula's government is bringing to the world right now, something we have to continue to uplift. And I think for those of us in the United States, to help us deepen our conversation with other progressive people about the challenge of increasing war dangers that are facing us in so many different ways. So I'll just bring it to a close there. I think this is an extraordinary opportunity. I think the opportunity to build between Afro-descended communities, between Brazil, the United States, and the African continent, the Caribbean as well, is, I don't know if it's higher than it's ever been, but it feels like there's so many opportunities for us to cross these different lines, to cross these different seas and oceans and language barriers and bring people together. I mean, honestly, again, I don't speak any Portuguese, but it's not that hard to feel at home as a Black person from America in the Black community in Brazil. It's not, you feel much more cultural repartee than I think most people might think. And I think that we have to build on that. We have to work on that. We have to find our weaknesses, and we have to continue to build these movements because I think there's so much that we can do together. So again, I'm so honored to have the opportunity to speak with all of you today, and thanks so much to DDB for allowing me to be here.
Thank you very much.
Peraí, mas ele foi no Brasil e não foi na minha casa, não tomou cerveja comigo, tá me devendo.
Next time, I have to come back now.
Okay, but so yeah, before, another round of applause for all of our speakers. We will be able to open up for 3 or 4 questions to our speakers for more. I'll ask everyone to be short on your questions, and for the speakers answering them to keep it at like at the most 2 minutes, so everybody has an opportunity to ask and have some answers.
And comments. So we open the floor. If you have any comments and questions for our beautiful panel. Introduce yourself quickly.
Great panel. I'm very happy to be here. My name is Edson. I'm from Brazil, born and raised over there. I'm a journalist. I write for the media afropress.com if you guys want to check out my writings. My question is direct to Eugene. Eugene, right? I've been living over here for the past 30 years. And, I read a lot. I went to college over here. And I feel that African Americans, they think that they have the monopoly when it comes to racism and slavery. Now, Eugene, how can we bridge this idea that racism and the things that happened to African Americans didn't happen to us, to Brazilians? And a lot of African Americans, they don't know that Brazil brought over 5 million Africans from the continent, while in America was a little over 600,000. How can we can bridge this gap between Afro-Brazilian and African Americans?
So it's a very good question. It's an important question, and it's one we maybe have to come up with a collective answer. I mean, I think from my point of view, the easiest answer to that question is always political education. It's tough to generalize. I think there are a lot of Black Americans who have a good understanding of the brutality of slavery in Brazil, the differences between them, but not to dwell on that, to speak to the real challenge you're putting. Maybe this is not the right way to say it, but maybe one of the most organized forces in the Black community here now is this foundational Black Americans ADOS movement. And I think we have to deconstruct the basis for why this is happening, why there's a sort of a Black nativism to some degree that's rising. And I think it has to be deeply connected to the failures of the Democratic Party political establishment that integrated in so many Black leaders in the wake of the civil rights movement with a lot of promise, and most of that promise was dashed. And I think the perception in Black America that Black issues are consistently sidelined versus any other issue, which in many ways is a distortion, but I think a lot of people feel that, has created a strong basis and a strong ground where people are having this, we want to be identified serially as Black Americans and having a particular experience. And I think we have to draw away from that, because the Black American experience is a diasporic experience. I mean, the history of, my name is Eugene per year. I don't know what, it's French. The impact of the Haitian slave owners leaving Haiti after the revolution and going to South Carolina and creating the early slave regimes, the one-drop rule regimes in such a big way, obviously show that there's a continental hemispheric experience to the Black experience in America. But of course, that's not taught anywhere in the sort of mainstream conversation. And I think that really speaks to our ability to be able to build spaces for popular education to help sort of spread that. So I think it's complex because people are coming at it from so many different angles and spaces, but I do agree that it is a big challenge that we have politically now to organize against those who are doing everything possible to sever Black Americans from solidarity with not only the rest of the Black diaspora, but Africa in and of itself, and also, Palestine, other parts of Latin America, Asia, and so on and so forth. I don't know if others have thoughts on that, but that's maybe my initial answer.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you all for the excellent table, the panel. My name is Cristina. I'm from Brazil, from Belo Horizonte, in the southeast of Brazil. I'm here as a visiting scholar in Performance Studies Department at NYU. My question is based on something that Fernando said in the beginning that I just stuck on this. You said that the immigrant and racial fight is the fight of the workers, is the workers' fight. and regarding this relation between immigration, race, and work, last week we had a couple of farms in Brazil where they've been discovered slavery work involving immigrants in Brazil, involving black people in Brazil, and obviously involving work relations. So in that sense, I was wondering if you guys have something to, relate on this issue. How can we make these three instances, these three realms together to fight together? If this makes sense, like if immigrants and racial workers, racial fighters and workers to get together to strengthen their powers, and not only here but also in Brazil, and facing this slavery, contemporary slavery situation. I mean, your thoughts about that? Thank you so much.
I think the point is great. As for work, I'm a construction safety professional, and one thing that we see very often is, for example, an immigrant worker here in the United States, he's 4 times more likely to get hurt on a construction site than a non-immigrant one. Why is that? So exploitation, right? So we see immigrant workers, most of the time they are exposed to more dangerous environments of work. They lack training. A lot of the times employers don't train them, and it's on the employers. The employers has by law to train the workers in a language that they understand. And the majority of the times we see that immigrant workers are the ones that are extremely exposed to that. Same thing as far as wage theft. You see that very often among immigrant communities. People work that they don't get paid. They don't get paid overtime. Sometimes they get paid under the table, so their employer don't offer them workers' compensation and all other rights as workers. So I see that migrant workers' rights is workers' rights. I don't think we can talk about elevating the like immigrants here or even immigrants in Brazil. I read stories of Bolivian immigrants in Brazil going through, like the worst, very poor conditions of work, of living. So I don't see us, like me as an organizer, I organize on on the community that I grew in, which is in Newark, a big Brazilian and immigrant community. As a member of DSA and DDB, I think that it's important for us to center there. I feel that if we don't make immigrant rights as front and center with the workers' rights, there's no moving forward. So here in Brazil, and to be honest, we see very often that these news coming up in Brazil about workers, and not only immigrant workers in Brazil, but a lot of, there was also a, recently that I read, I think was in a vineyard in the South Brazil. Same thing too, a lot of workers from Bahia, which is a predominantly black population state in Brazil. Same thing, working in conditions that close to slavery. So again, I feel that immigrant rights are workers' rights. I think that not only immigrants, but people of color is extremely open, are target for exploitation. And if we don't move forward thinking about black, indigenous people and people of color, as well as immigrants, as we organize for workers' rights, I don't see a way forward.
Thank you. Next question.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening. I'm Maria Fernanda. I'm here in New York for as visiting scholar as well. So I'm from São Paulo, and I'm studying philosophy, and and I'm considered a professor more than a philosopher. Actually, I'm really concerned about the backlash of the conservative in Brazil, but in particular in America Latina as a whole, because I think there is something important, that is how the racism question are being put in discussion. So it seems that, and I think Bolsonaro put this in evidence, that for him and for his supporters, the racism does not exist. Imagine that. So, and he's supported by the military, and for me the question is how we can move from the discussion as racism as a moral problem to a discussion as racism as a capitalism problem. So I think that is related with the question, the previous question about the labor that are happening at this moment, and this is one case, but for sure that are many cases of slave labor in Brazil and here as well, and it's not a question, it's just a opening yes, a statement. I want to hear I want to hear you. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria Fernanda. So I will go. You wanna if someone wanna comment on that, I will give to the next question.
I think it's like a good question, how to reframe our discussion in terms of racism, because it looked like that this idea, despite the fact that we as a black folks try to fight for humanize us, and the fight for humanize us, it's a capital. It's like the one of the consequences of this racial capitalism, right? I think like this modern world, was like created in this, perspective. We as a black folks, not only I don't want to talk for others, but we can consider indigenous folks, others groups, right? That was dehumanized, commodified. So our discussion, I don't think our discussion is only these, illustrate era humanism. It's a white humanism that don't recognize black folks as a human. Because it's easy, have this so-called modern slavery, because the center of the question is capital. It's not okay, let's love each other, let's create a community of love, blah, blah, blah. Okay, love is the center of the question. Of course, I'm not against that. But to, go to the center of our question is discuss, marketing, financial racism, economic racism, how black women, in case of Brazil, but here in US too, how they are, in this marked job, they are, treated. Otherwise, we used to this sort of ideal world, this sort of 1916 ideology of peace and love, blah, 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 blah. So racism, because there isn't other capitalism. There isn't other capitalism. There is only one capitalism, racial capitalism. Because that around the world, when we discuss race, it's not my idea, unfortunately. I would like to have, participate at the beginning of this discussion, but if you go to the black, black socialism, black communism, the book Black Communism, that in some way, not inaugurate, because this discussion is since the 1940s, but it strengthens this discussion about this racial capitalism. We need to look at it. Otherwise, it is this white, this white modern European, way to fight. Man, guys, it's not left-wing discussion, left-wing, proselytism. It's our lives, real lives. Even for women, black folks, it's the capital, the center of this discussion, I think,
Great, thank
So
you.
hard to
Thank you
go
very
after-
much. So, look, people, we have 3 people on the line, 2 questions. So I will close. We will close now the questions. I know it's an amazing debate, and we invite you all to follow these great people here. So I will give to you the questions, and then Marcos and our friend has a statement. And
thank you. I'll try to be really brief. One general comment and then a question for Douglas, I think who's the only person who's coming from Brazil at the moment. So I'm very inspired and really feeling empowered here as a person from Turkey. I'm a professor here at CUNY, College of Staten Island, but originally from Turkey, which is a country that has been under an authoritarian rule for now more than 15 years. We're on the brink of an election. All sorts of catastrophes hitting to the Middle East, not only to Turkey, with Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, in our borders, and the war with Ukraine on the way. So I'm here to get inspired from the only moment of last year where I felt like we can breathe now. That's an inspiring teaching moment. I want to know from how you guys did it, right? And also as a person who was a member of the pro-Kurdish party, who worked as a political advisor for 3 years at the moment of the whole witch hunting. So our co-leaders are in prison right now. And it's great to imagine a time where tables can turn. And I want to do this sort of thinking collectively, not in the borders of Americas, but elsewhere, all together, right? Part of an evolution group with other comrades, in the US and elsewhere. And I'm really hoping to extend our conversations. It was really inspiring to hear from all of you. The question is to Douglas, because I am curious to know a bit more about what were the biggest challenges, obstacles, when you were at the grassroots level of organizing for particularly the election? And what were the biggest maybe lessons you got, and maybe the highlights of the parts where you got to the level of victory, at the level of grassroots, please? Because we are doing that right now in Turkey under extreme fascist almost rule of organizing, not at the level of government only, but at the grassroots as well. The media doesn't exist anymore. The ethnic separation of Kurds, the denial of the Kurdish issue is a big problem. There are many other rights I could name here, but I'll just cut it here. Some lessons I could bring home would be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Douglas.
Can I jump in? Is that
Yes.
okay? Okay. I always defer to the facilitation. I mean, I think that I'll be very quick. Just a piece on racial, like why racial capitalism in particular, at least in sort of my political training. I think oftentimes we've been put in political situations where we've been made to center sort of the class capitalist question and then deprioritize the question of race. And in my political training, racism was not a product of capitalism. In fact, capitalism was born out of a context in which, even in the midst of feudalism, racialization was a particular character around how power was organized, and so it always, in order for some to be in positions of power, there needed to be sort of the subjugation of a group of people. Although it was different in the midst of that period of time under feudalism, there was still sort of this subjugation based on identity. So the proposition is that racism didn't just come born out of capitalism, out of like some elite saying we need to subjugate a whole bunch of people. Capitalism always had a racialized characteristic. And so at the heart of it, there is no challenging capitalism. There is no class question without the race question. And so it's part of my political question, as you weren't, I appreciate how you framed it. It's not like to be an anti-racist is not this like white liberal moral position. It is a strategic imperative in order to dismantle the challenge of capitalism and also the sort of the ways in which power is constructed globally.
And our solidarity with the Turkish people. Always.
Sim. É muito bom ouvir a Tenjui.
It's very good, always, like.
O fascismo fala simples com as pessoas.
Fascism have a direct conversation, right?
E toca na própria cultura e no moralismo construído historicamente.
So they go for culture, moralism that was built culturally.
Falo do Brasil, mas tenho a impressão que isso é uma dinâmica mundial.
I talk from the Brazilian perspective, but I think it's all the way.
As pessoas simples no Brasil entendem o Lula quando ele fala.
So common people understand Lula very well.
Por isso ele é a maior liderança popular da história da esquerda no Brasil.
Because that Lula is one of the most important leader in the Brazilian history, because they communicate very well with people, right?
E a esquerda brasileira tem uma dificuldade em construir uma outra liderança parecida com ele.
So Brazilian leftists have difficult to build or to show another leader like Lula.
Porque a esquerda tem uma natureza elitista.
Because the left wing has this elitist origin.
O Lula era o diferente dessa esquerda clássica.
The new, actor in this left.
O operário retirante nordestino.
The worker, the dispossessor, the migrant.
E o perfil médio da esquerda universitária, intelectual.
But in Brazil,
de classe média alta.
We had this sort of bourgeoisie left wing,
Bolsonaro conseguiu falar no coração, na alma, na moral conservadora brasileira.
Like Lula, Bolsonaro also address very well for people, but he goes for the moral aspect and also taught the scent of the whole heart of people.
O Brasil é um país culturalmente racista.
Brazil is traditional,
também machista,
racist, misogyny,
organizado a partir de um patriarcado colonial.
Brazil was organized by colonial patriarchy. Thank you, guys.
De homens brancos no poder, absolutamente homofóbicos.
The same guys, white men, conservatives, and also this homophobic.
E o Bolsonaro representou esse sentimento, que era um sentimento que, com o crescimento da esquerda e das agendas desses setores se tornou grande e insuportável para eles.
That's it. So Bolsonaro penetrate in this, group of white men. And also I'd like to give a data. Before Bolsonaro became popular in Brazil for election, the group of people who support Bolsonaro was white men's elite. 17% of the beginning of Bolsonaro government was composed by these guys.
De maneira que era muito difícil conversar com o vizinho sobre as eleições.
So it's like so difficult to talk
dentro das nossas próprias casas,
inside of our home, to talk about like politics.
E esse sentimento ele foi ativado a partir do uso de tecnologias em que nós, a esquerda, chegamos depois. A direita chegou primeiro também aí.
So, and also we was behind because, this sort of technology to communicate, the left wing was behind because, we got like so late. The right wing got first to use this sort of technology, Twitter and things like that.
E a direita sequestrou o nosso discurso revolucionário.
And also the right wing kidnapped.
Os contra-hegemônicos são eles, como se a esquerda vivesse no poder a vida inteira.
So the right wings like kidnap our sense of, counter revolution.
Eu sou um jovem senhor de 44 anos.
I am a young man of 24 years. 44. I'm kidding, guys.
E eu sou um militante desde 15 anos de idade.
And I'm an activist since my 15th.
Formado pela esquerda radical no Brasil.
I was like built by these left-wing ideas.
Eu sonhei ocupando o Congresso e quebrando os prédios do Congresso Nacional.
This sort of, invade Congress, some institution.
Contra a direita histórica, colonial,
dream, not
racista.
for white wings' dreams, but they did it.
E nós vivemos um momento da história em que nós defendemos as instituições e a tal democracia.
Do you know what is crazy? We support this sort of, defend this sort of system that in the past was against for.
Eu vou repetir o que eu disse agora há pouco.
I will repeat what I said before.
Não somos nós que escolhemos o contexto histórico. A gente lida com o contexto histórico.
We are some of the, historical background.
Temos que lidar com isso. Agora precisamos.
Not us that choose the historical context, right?
Temos que construir outros
deal with that.
We need to build a new context.
Nós estamos aqui para construir outros contextos.
We are here, do you know what, for build this new context.
Nós temos que voltar a propor o sonho e o futuro para as populações no mundo. A direita constrói uma narrativa como se eles oferecessem um futuro, como se eles pudessem mudar tudo e fazer uma revolução.
So we lost this, narrative about the future for white wings.
Mas o que não foi experimentado ainda foi uma igualdade real e verdadeira na vida da maioria da população do mundo.
But unfortunately, we don't live this sort of
uma igualdade real.
What was not built in the world is the real equality.
Yeah.
Quem tem esse sonho a oferecer é o povo que nunca a viveu.
So
somos nós.
Yeah, exactly. So who has this not this monopoly of dream, but grassroots movement, and also the common people has these dreams in hand, and then we need to rebuild that.
Portanto, a eleição é só um pedacinho, né? Nós temos que disputar a mentalidade para mudar o mundo. Isso vence eleições também.
So,
vencer uma eleição é pequeno diante do desafio de mudar o mundo.
Election is just a part of our struggle. We have also to, try to imagine the world, a better world.
Great, thank you. So I would like to thank you all, and we are going to the end. We have our Conrad here to have a statement, and then we have a note from Gabi. Where is Gabi? So, yeah.
Okay, boom. So just really quickly, my statement is about what the comrade and compañero Douglas said about what Bolsonaro's doing in the country, about how he's going to different like right-wing forces here. And it kind of made me think about this event that happened a month ago in this very interesting state, as we know as Florida. You know, like Florida, I mean, we have to keep our eye on Florida because it's becoming the epicenter of fascism within the United States. It's having like a competition with Texas. I've heard this from a comrade of Fernando's from DSA. It's having a competition with Texas. But right now with Florida, you know, having the governor like Ron DeSantis, who's a very right-wing governor, trying to fight this so-called culture war, fighting against the LGBTQ rights and also black studies in the high school. You have CIA headquarters in Florida. You have the right-wing Cubans that have done terrorist attacks on Cuba, and now you have Bolsonaro. You know, and he's in Orlando. You know, right near Disneyland. But yeah, there was an event. So I'm part of this collective called Troika. It's a social media collective, but it started out in Miami. And I have it's from left-wing Latinos, built from left-wing Latinos. So I had a comrade of mine that went to an event that Bolsonaro was speaking at. And when going to the event, he saw like Nazi flags outside. Like they had like the swastikas and all that other stuff. And also within the event, Bolsonaro was saying how he's still the president of Brazil, how the elections, they robbed him of the elections. You know, this is kind of like similar with Trump's playbook of like how he got robbed of the elections. You know, and it's funny because both Trump and Bolsonaro, like their connection is Steve Bannon. So I just wanted to just add on to like, I just wanted to share that, you know, what Bolsonaro is doing in these type of reunions with the right wing here, of how he's still saying he's the president of Brazil and he got robbed of the elections.
Thank you very much, man. And I would like to ask Gabi. Gabi has a very good call for us.
Yes. Muito obrigado, companheiros. Comrades, this is a call to action, much like I feel like this presentation was a call to action in remembering that Black liberation, the struggle for Black liberation transcends colonial borders, right? And the importance of building internationalism here in the United States in the belly of imperialism. So I'm inviting all of you to join us. I'm also a member of the Answer Coalition with Eugene, to join us in DC on March 18th. We are organizing a protest outside of the White House to demand an end to the war in Ukraine, to demand a call for negotiations and for the United States government to stop funneling money into this war, into imperialism. We need to bring imperialism to its knees in order for Black liberation to be achieved anywhere in the world. So it's great to meet you here in this context, but I definitely want to be in the struggle with you all. So please hit me up. I have flyers. We got buses leaving from New York, from soon New Jersey, so I can get you there, and let's organize. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabi. Thank you all. So we are to start. I want to pass so we better go soon because our comrades at the People's Forum needs, right? They are time to go home and organize here until we leave. So I want to pass the microphone for final, very quick words from every one of you. Thank you. Final words.
Tá, últimas palavras. O dinheiro que Biden está colocando na guerra é mais do que todo o dinheiro que, segundo a ONU, seria necessário para acabar com a fome nesse momento no mundo.
So the money that Biden is putting the war now is there enough money to finish the hungry around the world.
De fato, eles têm as prioridades deles. Nós temos que ter as nossas.
In fact, they have their priority and you must have us. Our priority.
No Brasil, nós temos 33 milhões de pessoas que não conseguem fazer as 3 refeições diárias.
In Brazil, we have like 30,000 million of people that doesn't have, food.
O Brasil é um dos maiores países em território no mundo.
Despite the fact that Brazil is like one of the largest country around the world.
Se não for o maior produtor de comida, é um dos maiores produtores de comida do planeta.
If Brazil is not like the larger food producer, they could be or not.
E a luta pela terra gera assassinatos e genocídios, como que vocês devem ter acompanhado dos povos do povo Yanomami,
In Brazil, one of
povos
the
indígenas
central
da Amazônia.
in Brazil, one of the center crash is like the struggle for land, and because that a lot of people have been killed. You know?
Assim como
Of the Yanomami
assim como os
people.
quilombolas, que também têm direito ancestral às terras e têm esse direito negado.
As well as like Maroon Society descendant that has like the right, you know, under the land that where they live.
Há uma cultura no Brasil de servidão da elite brasileira às elites capitalistas, especialmente a norte-americana.
Brazil has like a tradition of colonial, like, you know, colonial
Servitude.
net with imperialism to serve imperialism, right?
O Bolsonaro
Especially US imperialism.
encarna e atualiza isso.
And Bolsonaro embodied this, right?
Nunca foi tão importante organizar as ações nas bases dos territórios, nos bairros, nas cidades, a partir do movimento negro.
So because that more than ever, we need organized people, you know, in community everywhere.
E isso precisa ser feito em escala mundial, em escala diaspórica.
It should be like, it must be like in the, you know, diasporic world.
Esse é o convite que eu faço a cada um de vocês que possam se somar a essa aliança.
It's my invitation for all of you here.
Fortalecendo as organizações locais aqui, dos brasileiros que se organizam aqui, mas também das organizações dos companheiros do partido, do movimento negro, e assim estará fortalecendo o nosso trabalho no Brasil também.
Not only like a Brazilian community here, but also other organization in US. So we need strength these
E
organizations.
na medida do possível, repercutam as ações do movimento negro brasileiro aqui.
So, as possible, try to, you know, strengthen this black movement
Como
here
um
in
bom
US.
país colonizado, o que acontece aqui faz efeito lá.
So, as a colonialism, as you know, one sound here, you know, become like a scream in Brazil.
Nós, para terminar, em 2020, logo após o assassinato de George Floyd,
In 2020, after George Floyd murder,
segurança do Carrefour espancou um homem negro até a morte no estacionamento do shopping.
we have like a similar case in Brazil in the Carrefour supermarket.
E o movimento For Black Lives deu uma nota sobre esse acontecimento aqui.
And MBL, you know, give like a report here in US in solidarity with
A grande
this.
imprensa brasileira só deu espaço lá depois que isso aconteceu aqui.
The, you know, big media outlet just like pronounce themselves after people talk about this issue here in US.
Então vocês podem ajudar e fortalecer nossa iniciativa. Tamo
So-
junto, muito obrigado.
So let become it loud. Start here in US. Let's use colonialism in our favor.
Thank
Isso
you.
que é um
Thank you
tradutor, que
very
ele
much.
melhora a origem.
Pass
Ele
the
melhora a
microphone.
original.
Yeah.
É muito bom.
Of course not. Of course not.
Okay, final words.
I'll be quick. Yeah, sorry. I'll try to be very quick. So I just feel like there's a lot. There's a lot in this moment. I guess what I'm grounded by is how we started. Like, this is a moment of both peril and possibility. We have to be honest about everything that is happening in this moment. At least this is what I feel. A lot of us are being bombarded with all the like, not just like death, but all the continuous harm and threat to ourselves and our people. We're being bombarded by like Black Death. We're being bombarded by the fact that so many of our people don't have access to the material needs in order for them to be able to like live a life that they deserve. We're being bombarded with this acceleration of threat. We're being bombarded by just also what's just happening to our planet because of extraction. There is just so much going on, and it doesn't do us any justice to ignore the level of threat and urgency of this moment. I think that we have to be sober and real just about all that's happening in this particular moment in time, and also how it's affecting us in our everyday lives. But what we must also do is also hold that this is a power building moment. When I think about the threat and the challenge of this moment, for me, it's a battle cry for all of us. It's not a moment to stand down. It's not a moment to descend into pessimism. It's not in the moment to organize into under the cloud of defeat. It's actually a battle cry. I feel like it's a cry from our ancestors and future generations to take up arms. And our arms is ideological coherence, clear strategy, and the willingness to love each other enough to struggle over ideas, to struggle through difference, to struggle through challenge, to choose each other, to build a movement that can deal with the challenge of this time. And so that feels really important to me. And I'll just end too, is what they rob us of most is each other. What they rob us, what capitalism and neoliberalism does is hyper individualism. And so when you talk about like, it's hard to permeate other communities, we become into a culture of me versus you, of domination. The only way to confront hyper individualism and ego is collectivism and humility. And so that's the sort of spirit in which we need to enter into social movement, but it also is what's required is an individual transformation. And the last is we need political imagination, and we need to believe that we can actually make victory possible. Comrades, we sometimes organize like we are losing. We actually have to begin to dream of the actual victory that we know we can make possible. We have to live it, we have to embody it, and then we have to choose each other in order to do what we need to do.
Right on.
So I would like to invite Tassiana to say the final words to us.
Thank you all for the opportunity to be here, to listen to you guys. It's so important to create this environment of community and connection. I do agree with everything that our comrade just said. And I will invite you to connect with the Lula Collective. At Lula Collective on Instagram, you can Google Lula Collective to find our website. So reach out and let's continue this conversation for the future. Thank you so much, and have you all a good night.
Thank you, Tassiana. Now we invite Eugene for his final words. Fire words.
I'm gonna be quick, Andy. I'm gonna be quick. I'll just say this, and this has been an amazing event, and thanks to everybody. In Port-au-Prince in Haiti, all the big marches you see, they come from all parts of the city, all parts of Port-au-Prince, but they all converge in this area. I don't know what to say. It's like multiple highways coming together, and they call it the crossroads of resistance. And you in a way have to sort of be there to really feel it, but it's this amazing churn that's created of the different neighborhoods in Port-au-Prince, the different organizations, the different communities, the bands, the media, everybody coming together in this way that is not really organized and is somewhat chaotic, but it's just this beauty and this energy that then drives the marches with the hundreds of thousands of people in 100-degree weather, and you've already marched 2 miles, and somehow it just gives you this whole new second wind to keep going and keep fighting and keep pushing and shut down the city for the whole day. So I guess I just take from that, metaphorically, I guess, let's try to create more crossroads of resistance wherever they may be, in the South Bronx, in Salvador, in Sao Paulo, in South Africa, or wherever we need to do it. And I think we can do it together. I believe we can win. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you very much. These amazing, amazing, amazing speakers tonight. So I would like to, first of all, thank you, Natalia de Campos, our producer, our leader of Defend Democracy in Brazil, that prepare all this, in detail, all this event. And thank you again to the People's Forum, all members of Defend Democracy in Brazil present here, UNEafro Brasil, Answer Coalition, especially to Movement for Black Lives, UNEafro Afro-Brazilian Rights Working Group, and Quilomba Collective. Thank you very much. And as we say in good Portuguese, a luta continua. The struggle will continue. Thank you all. Thank you all for helping to to put the chairs on top, and we will see you soon in the struggle. Let's go to Washington, D.C. on the 18th. Thank you very much. Let's take a picture.